This video is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino.
We all know about the Rutger McGroarty trade request, a top prospect by the Winnipeg Jets that likely still will end up on a different team. But just in the last week, there was almost a huge trade between the Winnipeg Jets and the Carolina Hurricanes that honestly was about as bonkers as you could possibly get. And today we're going to be breaking down the trade that almost happened between these two teams, what it means for both these squads going forward, and what these teams missed out on. So make sure you watch till the end as we break down every part of this deal. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the offseason. Now, we talked about Rutger McGroarty quite a bit on this channel. It's been well documented, his trade request from the Winnipeg Jets. After Winnipeg wasn't really going to guarantee him automatic NHL playing time, Rutger McGroarty wanted to go somewhere else, and he's been on the trade block for a few months now. I thought something for sure was going to happen in the 2024 NHL draft, but nothing ended up happening. No trades were made, but in the past week, we've still seen Winnipeg be heavily active in trying to deal him. I mean, it makes sense. You don't want to lose this guy for nothing, especially if Winnipeg was to get a established NHL player back for him. That could be a pretty interesting deal. But this is still somebody that, even with the trade request, I think has pretty massive value. He's somebody that in the NCAA has just been consistently dominant for Michigan. And even though there are still the issues there with his acceleration speed, he's somebody that with the determination he has, with the IQ he has around the ice, the smart decisions, the quick playmaking, he's somebody that I think will be a pretty excellent middle six piece, and I think could be a pretty good second liner someday. But folks, even though we heard a lot about Rutger McGroarty potentially being dealt for draft picks or something like that during the draft time, Winnipeg has not stopped. They have continued to try to deal him as they should, and recently there was a huge trade offer, apparently by Winnipeg, to Carolina for Marty Necas. And we had this huge recap tweet by Petty Packer talking about what Frank Saravelli said on the DFO podcast, talking about what the Sabres had for Necas and also what the Jets had for Necas. And of course, this being after Necas signed his extension with Carolina, which was a pretty big one, 2 years. And it's good to see him back signed for the NHL next year. But the info here was pretty massive. Apparently, the Sabres had a trade for Necas, but he wouldn't sign there, which does make sense. Obviously, Buffalo isn't on the top priority list for a lot of different guys, and for Necas, it seemed to be the same way. But then on the second line here, they say that the Jets offered Rutger McGroarty, Cole Perfetti, and a pick for Necas, but the deal never happened and didn't know the reason. Now, immediately, your mind just goes, whoa, I mean, Perfetti, McGroarty, and a pick on top, which I don't think would have been a crazy pick or anything, considering the two players they were already signing to Carolina. But imagine if this deal happened, if Necas went to Winnipeg on top of the great pieces they already have in that top six, and Carolina was able to get players like McGroarty and Perfetti, adding to a pretty underrated U25 core. That could have been a fascinating deal. Obviously, for Carolina, I think they probably would have wanted more NHL-ready talent, but in McGroarty's case, I think they could have given him an opportunity. Same thing with Perfetti, which they haven't gotten in Winnipeg. Now, to me, this deal would have been fascinating for all sides involved. You got Rutger McGroarty, who I think would have done very well with Carolina, but I do think with the depth and some of the other younger players there that he'd have to fight for, like Bradley Nadeau and other players too, like Jackson Blake, it would have had some massive competition, but McGroarty is somebody that could have rose to the occasion. Cole Perfetti, though, I think is the underrated piece of this deal. He's somebody that I honestly just want to see in another situation other than Winnipeg, because they really haven't given him the best opportunity to succeed. He's somebody, though, I think with the IQ-driven game he has, some of the creativity he's already shown in the NHL, I think there is still some great potential there to be an established top six forward. And I think in Carolina, he could have been that as soon as this next year. I mean, you see this last season, 19 goals, 19 assists, 38 points. There's a good base to build off there, and I do think he'll be a strong forward for Winnipeg this next year, at least if they give him the opportunity. But in Carolina, I think he could have been fascinating there. And then you got Marty Necas, who I think would have put up numbers in Winnipeg. With the offensive core they have there, really loving their top-end offensive pieces, Necas would have been brilliant there with the straight line speed, the creativity he has, the pace there. He would have been so much fun. But as we'll get into, I think one of the main reasons why this might not have happened is because I think Winnipeg, rightfully so, wanted security if they were going to trade for Necas. Security, not just that he was going to sign there, but sign long term. I mean, that is really the main priority when I think Winnipeg is trading for anybody, is that one, they want to be a Winnipeg Jet, that they're fine living in Winnipeg, and two, that they want to stay there long term. It's been a massive problem with a lot of these Canadian cities keeping their top end players, and especially for lower end cities like Winnipeg, who have the harder climate to worry about, that can deter a lot of players. They needed Necas to fully be on board, and he might not have been, especially considering we know he rejected a deal with Buffalo, and you could kind of see the same situation happening again. Now, personally, in terms of pure value, if I was Carolina, I would absolutely be accepting this deal, especially if Rutger McGroarty were to want to come over. That to me is maybe the main thing there. Maybe McGroarty didn't want to, and maybe that's something that Carolina knew about, and they didn't see McGroarty signing with them. That could have been something that stopped them from making this deal. But if he did want to come over and all of that worked out, I think in terms of pure value, it would have been very good. But I think there is the case you made that Carolina is already bringing one of Jackson Blake, Bradley Nadeau, maybe even both of them onto the roster this year. And if you were going to trade Marty Necas, this big time player for you, that you might have wanted something more NHL ready, or at least somebody with more experience, more playoff experience and success there to bring onto your top six and really be an established player. Even in Cole Perfetti's case, who would be the most NHL ready player of the group that they would get back, even he has had his growing pains and still hasn't fully broken out into the NHL. He could with Carolina, but I do think that goal scoring in the playoffs has been a major issue, and this trade probably wouldn't have helped that, at least not yet. And you keep Necas and you keep him along for the ride, and he was somebody that had a pretty decent playoff run, an underrated one, 4 goals, 5 assists, 9 points in 11 games this last year onto your roster. And especially with a shorter term, you still have the ability to trade him and make a deal later on. But I think for the now, Carolina was in a position where they wanted more NHL talent, and Necas was probably the best NHL player in any Necas trade. But I can't lie, it definitely would have been exciting to see Necas in Winnipeg if he ended up signing long term, which again is a big if. I think it would have been a fascinating addition for them. He could have been as a top 2 right wing, ahead or below Velarde, depending on the line combinations there. And again, I still think it's an underrated aspect of Necas' game that he can play center. The face-off dot isn't very good, but offensively he's put up some pretty good numbers there, and could have been the second line center there now, of course, with them losing Sean Monahan in free agency. He could have been a very interesting fit there in wherever he ended up playing. I mean, Winnipeg has so many options there, especially now they seem to be keeping Nikolai Ehlers. Adding a player like Necas onto there too would have been pretty incredible. But as we now know, Necas ended up signing in Carolina, and the deal is nixed, at least for now. Obviously, there could still be a deal, and Necas having a contract could maybe help things, but I think in Winnipeg, again, they'd want to have him sign long-term, and that short-term deal isn't helping things either. I think there are a few reasons, though, why this deal on, honestly, both sides could have ended up being rejected, and to me, a lot of reasons why this deal didn't end up happening. Now, we're going to get into the reasons why this deal didn't happen, in my opinion, but first, I want to talk about today's sponsor in BetUS. If you guys don't know about BetUS already, it's the best place, especially with the season coming up here, to make bets on whatever you want to make on different NHL games when the season starts. And before the season starts, you got regular season awards, and we're going to be talking about the Calder Trophy in a shorts that I just recorded coming up here. But you got the Calder Trophy odds for this next year released, and there's some pretty interesting ones. You got Matvei Michkov right at the very top at plus 450. I was talking about Dustin Wolf before as kind of a hot take that I think he'll be in the Calder race and potentially winning it. For plus 1,000, I put $10 down to win 100, and we're just going to see what happens. I think Dustin Wolf, though, with the starter net there in Calgary, could be very solid immediately, and he's somebody that I think is really underrated to win this next year. But if you guys want to make your own picks on the Calder Trophy and any of the major trophies for next year, plus for the Stanley Cup next year as well, some pretty interesting odds there, go in the description, sign up to BetUS today, and you'll get an 125% sign-up bonus up to $2,000. It's a great deal there, and the best time to start is today with BetUS. First, and pretty much the biggest reason why I think this deal didn't end up happening is because I don't think Necas wanted to sign in Winnipeg long term. I think a lot of the same issues that he might have had with Buffalo as a region, as a team, could have applied to the Winnipeg Jets as well. If he didn't like the cold, didn't like the climate, didn't like the situation there, the kind of no man's land situation they have going on, then maybe he didn't want to go to Winnipeg after all. To me, I think this is the most likely reason this deal didn't get done, because if Necas said no to the deal, if he didn't want to sign long-term Winnipeg, there was nothing that Winnipeg could have done to make it happen. The second reason, as we've also talked about before, is that Rutger McGroarty could have just not wanted to sign in Carolina, and that could have been also a pretty big wrinkle. Of course, he doesn't want to sign in Winnipeg. What's to stop him from not wanting to sign wherever else? I think Rutger McGroarty is somebody that wants to go to the best situation possible for him, and he wants to get NHL playing time this next year, which good luck, buddy, at least at this rate. But I think Carolina would have been a team that, even though he could have had a chance to play on this next year, definitely couldn't have promised him top six time either. I think McGroarty would have had to go to some team like San Jose or wherever to actually get guaranteed top six time. But to me, personally, I still think McGroarty needs a year in the AHL to really season that skating and get up to the NHL pace. I still don't think he's a top six player in the NHL this next year, and the situation would have had to be perfect for him to actually be there, and I just don't think it would have been in Carolina. I think at best, he maybe would have been the second line right wing, at least if he were to be traded for Necas, maybe just replacing his spot, but I could easily see a player like Jack Roslovic maybe playing better than him throughout the season, and there being some line matching there. I think he would have had a shot at a top six role, but it definitely wouldn't have been guaranteed. I don't think any spot is guaranteed for him, which again, I think is just a problem in general of McGroarty's attitude, but in Carolina, it would have been an issue if he wasn't playing up to the level that he needed to. And going on to the third reason why I think this deal might not have happened is also because it might not have been enough for the Carolina Hurricanes. In terms of pure value, I think it was, but again, you got to think about where Carolina is as a franchise, what they're trying to do. They're trying to win a Stanley Cup. And sure, McGroarty and Perfetti would have absolutely juiced up that youth core and made it even better, but I think Carolina, especially in an Necas deal, wants to get somebody of the value of Necas, wants to get somebody that can immediately put an impact onto at least that middle six and preferably that top line. To me, I think Carolina would want somebody that is a difference maker already, somebody that at least that could fill that potential this next year. I think Perfetti could have been, but I think they really wanted somebody that would really push themselves to that next level offensively in an Necas deal, and that deal I think that Winnipeg offered wouldn't have let that happen, at least not yet. It's been said recently that Columbus wants futures for Line A, but Carolina and Necas aren't Line A and Columbus. They're in a much different spot in their franchise, and I think they would have wanted a difference maker from Winnipeg. I think it would have been Nikolai Ehlers, who they were asking for, coming back to Carolina, and that's, of course, assuming that Necas would want to sign long-term in Winnipeg. I think Ehlers would have been the player that Carolina was really looking for, and I think that would have been a really interesting addition for them, but I don't think they wanted futures as the entire part of the trade. Maybe they wanted a pick, maybe they wanted one prospect in the deal, but it wasn't supposed to be the main piece of the trade. It was supposed to be somebody that would make a difference immediately into that top six, and it doesn't seem like Winnipeg was willing to make that happen. Unfortunately, though, I really don't see Carolina Winnipeg going back to a Necas Ehlers type deal, mostly because with Ehlers' contract, he's a UFA after this next year, and unless there's some crazy trade deadline deal, it just wouldn't make sense for Carolina to trade for him at that time, or especially once he's a UFA, maybe they trade for his rights or something, but especially considering Necas' value, that would not be a one-for-one trade whatsoever. But I do feel like with Carolina, there is still the potential in the future from the trade Necas. I think because the lack of a long-term deal there's automatically the questions that are raised, but he has 2 more years left on his contract at a pretty good AAV. But I think for Carolina, just getting him under contract, getting that mess over with, and just keeping him for the top 6 was probably the right decision. And because they were able to get Necas for a lower AAV, shorter term deal, that opens up so much more cap space for Seth Jarvis's new deal, who I think is a lot more likely to sign long-term in Carolina. He, to me, is the real prize, though, of how he's been able to develop, just how good he's been. 67 points this last year in 81 games, 33 goals. I was a big fan of Jarvis back in his draft year, but he's been even better than I was expecting, and he's somebody that for Carolina is the piece that they needed to keep going forward. I don't know what the AAV would look like on that long-term extension, but hopefully you have a couple million at least left over in cap space. Right now, Carolina is working with around $8.5 million in cap space for this next year. So a big chunk of that will be the new Jarvis deal, but I think for Carolina, there is still some wiggle room here to make a big deal at the deadline, hopefully getting another offensive piece, because I still think they're one game breaker away. Jay Gensel is somebody that was a great piece for them, and unfortunately, he ended up leaving, but I think they need somebody like that to still have a great chance next year, because the offensive top 6, I still think they need one more superstar, and that's been a major problem still for Carolina. But the problem is now, even though Necas is signed and put a bow on this deal, I still don't really know what happens with Rutger McGroarty. Considering his ask, what he actually wants in the NHL, I still think there are very few teams out there that are actually going to give him the playing time that he wants immediately, and I think there's a chance that he could get that playing time and actually not be very good with it. I still think there is some growing pains there that are going to happen with McGroarty, especially if he's thrust to the wolves in a top 6 role. But to me, it's a weird situation now. Does he go back to Michigan and just wait another year to be dealt? I don't know what happens at that point, but I feel like McGroarty could still use a little bit more seasoning, and I don't think that's the end of the world completely. But I would love to know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about the McGroarty situation? Do you think he still gets traded this offseason? The clock is ticking, man. I mean, we got like a month to go until the NCAA training camp start, and then of course a couple months to go until the NHL season starts. So there's going to be a lot of more talk about McGroarty and the Jets and what deals could happen. But I'd love to know, what team do you think could actually get a McGroarty deal done in the end? I would know your thoughts down below, and just this deal in general, what could have happened? Do you think it would have been a big win for Carolina or for Winnipeg? And what do you think is the main reason why this deal didn't end up happening? Was it because of Necas rejecting? Was it because of McGroarty rejecting? I would love to know your thoughts down below. And of course, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share a video of all the hockey fans, especially the Canes and Jets fans, to know what happened here and almost happened with a big trade. And I will see you guys in the next one. I hope you have a fantastic hockey day. Drink some water for me, and goodbye.